Hi, I'm Ava. I'm 24 years old, and I'm living with my parents while finishing my final year of university. You'd think life would be simple right now: study, graduate, start my career. But nope. Simplicity doesn't exist in my world. Why? One word: Jasmine. My older sister Jasmine is 31, married, and lives across town with her husband and their 5-year-old twins, Emma and Ezra. She has a home, a car, a full-time job, and yet, somehow, I've become her full-time unpaid babysitter. It wasn't always like this, but it started before I even realized what was happening. I remember the first time clearly. I had just started university. Freshman Ava, still adjusting to dorm life and bad coffee. One Saturday morning, Jasmine showed up at my parents' house holding 2 tiny, squirming infants and a diaper bag big enough to require wheels. She looked rushed, eyes wide like she was on the verge of a meltdown. "Ava, I've got a huge meeting. Just 1 hour, I swear. Can you watch them?" I was barely awake, wearing mismatched socks and still chewing on my morning toast. I hesitated, but how could I say no? They were adorable, and it was just 1 hour. Right? Wrong. 1 hour turned into 2, then 4. Then the sun started setting, and I was covered in formula and regret. Jasmine returned around 7 p.m., not looking the least bit flustered. No laptop bag. No signs of work stress. Just shopping bags and a smug smile. "Thanks, sis. You're such a natural," she chirped, kissing the babies' heads and grabbing a juice from the fridge. That should have been my warning. From that moment on, it became a pattern. Need to get her nails done. Drop the twins with Ava. Hair appointment. Ava's got them. Grocery run that somehow takes 6 hours. Ava to the rescue. It didn't matter if I had lectures, exams, or if I was literally on my way out the door. She'd show up, hand me the kids, and vanish like a magician, avoiding her responsibilities. I tried setting boundaries, tried being firm. Once, during midterms, I opened the door to find Jasmine already halfway through the living room with diaper bags in hand. "Jas, I have a stats exam tomorrow," I protested, half-dressed and holding a highlighter like it was a weapon. "Relax," she waved me off. "They'll nap. You can study then." Anyone who has ever been around babies knows they don't nap when you want them to. Instead, they develop synchronized chaos like it's a superpower. One would cry, the other would poop. One would want snacks, the other would hurl them across the room. I was falling behind in school, living on caffeine, and missing out on everything that made university fun. One weekend, after she dropped the kids off without even knocking, I broke. "I haven't seen my friends in a month, Jasmine." The first snapped. She blinked, totally unfazed. "You'll survive. They love you. Plus, you're just so good with them, right? Because being good with kids means giving up every ounce of your free time." I was drowning, and no one seemed to care. Graduation finally approached. I was clinging to the light at the end of the tunnel, barely holding on, but hopeful. One night, my friends and I gathered at this cozy little cafe we practically lived in during study season. "So," Diana asked, sipping her iced coffee, "what's next? Grad school? Job hunting? Taking over the world?" Heather grinned. "I say we travel before we get sucked into the adulting vortex. One last hurrah." "I'm in," I said before anyone could blink. "What about France?" It was like setting off fireworks. Phones came out, tickets were researched, group chats exploded with ideas. For the first time in forever, I felt alive. This trip, it wasn't just a vacation. It was my shot at freedom. My grandma had gifted me $10,000 as a graduation gift, and I knew exactly where it was going. By the time we left the cafe, we had booked the trip flights, hotel, everything. 2 weeks in July. I floated home, bubbling with joy. But of course, reality wasn't far behind. That evening, Jasmine and her husband were over for dinner. I could hardly sit through lasagna without blurting it out. "We're going to France," I said, nearly bouncing in my seat. Jasmine froze. Her fork hovered midair. "When?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Second week of July," I said, grinning. "We booked today." She slammed her fork down. "Are you serious?" "That's when Damien and I are going to Cancun." My smile faltered. "Wait, what? You knew we were going then," she snapped. "You planned this on purpose so you wouldn't have to watch the twins." I stared at her, completely blindsided. "I didn't know, Jas. We just booked today." Cancel it," she cut me off. "I can't. Everything's paid for." Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. So you're choosing your friends over your family? No, I was choosing myself. But I didn't say that, not yet. She kept going, ranting about how I was selfish, how the twins needed me, how this is what sisters are for. But something in me shifted that night. Maybe it was the months of exhaustion finally catching up, or maybe it was the way she assumed I'd crumble like I always did. But I didn't. I'm not canceling, I said calmly. I've missed out on everything for years. This trip is for me. I'm going. Her face turned crimson. You're abandoning us. No, I said. I'm finally choosing me. She stormed out, muttering about how irresponsible I was. My parents stayed quiet, which was worse than yelling. But I stood my ground. For once, I wasn't bending to fit someone else's plans. But I had no idea the storm Jasmine was about to unleash. For the next 2 weeks, the house was eerily quiet. No twin-induced chaos. No unannounced visits. No texts from Jasmine asking for just a quick favor. You'd think that would bring peace. But honestly, it felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, just waiting for it to come spinning back around. I spent those days focused on getting everything ready for France. Packing cube obsession, activated. Passport, travel docs, adapters all in neat little folders, tucked inside a lockable suitcase I kept in my closet. Every detail was locked down, literally. I wasn't about to leave anything to chance. Still, something sat heavy in my gut. Jasmine's silence wasn't normal. She wasn't the type to back down, and she definitely wasn't the type to give up control. The day before my flight, I realized I needed a few last-minute things: snacks, toiletries, a new travel pillow, because mine had mysteriously vanished. Seriously, where do those go? I told Mom I was heading to the store and promised I wouldn't be long. The trip took maybe an hour. I wandered through crowded aisles, dodging cranky toddlers and couples arguing over sunscreen. Just another pre-vacation Target run. When I got home, everything felt off. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind that hums in your ears. But faintly, from the living room, I heard giggles, familiar giggles. I froze. No, 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 no. I dropped my bags and rushed in, heart already pounding. There, sitting cross-legged on the rug, were Emma and Ezra. They looked up at me like nothing was wrong, like they hadn't just cracked open the vault of my sanity. In their hands, my passport. I lunged for it. No, 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 give that to me. Too late. I stared at what was once my perfect, pristine passport. The photo page was gone, not torn cut. The pages were covered in scribbles, red, blue, purple marker lines dancing across every visa stamp. My travel plans had been shredded by Crayola. I let out a noise I didn't even recognize. A scream? A sob? Some mix of both. I collapsed onto the couch, shaking. I could barely breathe. All those months of dreaming, the planning, the money, the moment I was supposed to reclaim my life gone. And then it hit me. Where were the adults? Who left them alone here? I was still clutching the ruined passport to my chest when my parents walked in through the front door, Jasmine trailing behind them like nothing was out of the ordinary. When they saw me sobbing on the couch, holding what used to be the key to my freedom, they all rushed over. What happened? Mom asked, already pulling Emma into her lap. I held up the mangled booklet with trembling hands. They destroyed my passport. Jasmine's reaction? A sigh. Like I'd spilled juice on the carpet or something. Ava, seriously? You should know better than to leave stuff lying around where kids can find it. My mouth dropped open. Excuse me? You're always so careless, she continued, shaking her head. It's not their fault. They're just curious. I stood up so fast the room tilted. Careless? My passport was in a locked suitcase, inside my closet, zipped in a security pouch with my other travel documents. Are you seriously trying to tell me your 5-year-olds cracked that open on their own? Her lips parted, but she hesitated. A flicker of something: guilt? Panic? It was gone in a blink. I don't know what happened, she said flatly. They're clever. Kids figure things out. No. You brought them here. You planned this. Oh, come on, she snapped, voice rising. You think I coached them to ruin your passport? You didn't need to coach them. You just needed to leave it out and let them do what kids do. She scoffed. Well, either way, it's done. You're not going to France now, obviously. So you'll be free to watch them while Damien and I go to Cancun. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You planned this, I said again, my voice low now. You knew exactly what this trip meant to me. and you found a way to ruin it without lifting a finger. You're being dramatic, Jasmine muttered. Dad hadn't said a word this whole time, but now his voice cut through the room. Emma. Ezra, he said gently, kneeling in front of them. Who gave you AVA's passport? The twins looked at each other, then at Jasmine. Ezra bounced on his heels like he was excited to share a secret. Mommy gave it to us. My heart dropped. She said we could color it, Emma added proudly. She said Ava would love it more if it had rainbows. Silence. Total, heavy, suffocating silence. Jasmine's face turned pale. You misunderstood, sweetie, she said quickly, but her voice cracked. No, we didn't, Ezra chirped. You gave us the scissors too, my mom gasped. Dad's eyes, usually soft, usually calm, were filled with fury. He stood slowly, jaw clenched. You did this. Dad, I didn't. You destroyed your sister's passport. You manipulated your kids. You sabotaged her dream on purpose. You just what? His voice rose. You just couldn't handle the idea that Ava was finally doing something for herself? Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. I needed her to watch them. And now you've lost that privilege, he said coldly. Jasmine blinked. What? You want someone to watch your kids? Hire a sitter. Ava's done. She turned to Mom, desperate. But Mom just shook her head. We raised you better than this. I stood there, completely still, not angry, not even sad, just free. My trip was ruined. My passport looked like a kindergarten art project, but something bigger had happened. The truth was out. Jasmine's grip on me, broken. As I bent down to pick up the shredded pages, my phone buzzed. A text from Diana. We'll wait. Get a new passport. We'll reschedule. France isn't going anywhere. And just like that, I knew I hadn't lost everything. I had my friends. I had the truth. And for the first time in years, I had choices. The days after everything blew up at home felt different, not quiet. Jasmine doesn't go down quietly, but still different. The air was lighter. I could breathe. No twins barging into my room, no guilt trips, no surprise diaper drop-offs. It felt like reclaiming my own life, one breath at a time. But that didn't mean Jasmine was done. She didn't call, didn't text, not once. But her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I knew that. I could feel her plotting, waiting, probably crafting the next emotional trap. I kept my distance, and for once, my parents didn't interfere. Dad, especially, had changed since the confrontation. He looked at me differently now, like he saw me as an adult, not the little girl who could be guilted into anything with a few tears and the word family. One morning, about a week later, he walked into the kitchen while I was making coffee and leaned against the counter. You're going to reapply for that passport, right? He asked, voice calm. Yeah, already started the process, I replied, trying not to sound too hopeful. Expedited it. They said 2 months. He nodded. You deserved that trip. It took everything in me not to cry. Thanks, Dad. He sipped his tea. We should have stepped in sooner. I didn't say anything. We both knew it was true. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept up the illusion of a busy life. Instagram stories of her at yoga, coffee shops, brunch, never with the twins, never at home. Always smiling, always filtered, but behind the scenes things were shifting. Mom mentioned, in passing, that Jasmine had taken an extended leave from work. She says she wants to spend more time with the kids, Mom said one day, folding laundry on the couch. But she's been dropping them off at Damien's mom's house almost every day. Of course she had. I just nodded and kept folding my shirts. The new ones I'd bought with a small chunk of the graduation money. I wasn't just planning for France anymore. I was planning for everything that came after. Then one evening, out of nowhere, Jasmine showed up. She didn't call first, just rang the bell, wearing big sunglasses and holding a latte like it was armor. I opened the door, blocking her with my body, unsure what she was doing there. Hey, she said, too casually. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. She sighed and looked past me. Not here. Can we sit outside? I stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. The air was still warm, late summer clinging on. We sat on opposite sides of the bench. There was space between us, but it felt like a canyon. I've been thinking, she started, stirring her drink even though it had no straw, about what happened. I waited. I probably overreacted, but you blindsided me with that trip, Ava. You didn't even tell me you were planning something that big. I turned to look at her. You think I owe you updates on my life now? She blinked. That's not what I meant, isn't it? She set the cup down on the railing, her posture stiff. I just mean, it felt like you were hiding it. Like you were planning it to avoid me. I was planning it for me. That's not the same thing. She let out a breath, then tried another angle. Look, I know things got messy, but can't we just go back to how it used to be? I miss my sister. That part, that hurt. I missed her too. I missed the version of Jasmine who used to braid my hair before school, who'd sneak me her old makeup and laugh with me at dumb movies. But that Jasmine had vanished the moment her twins were born, and in her place, someone who saw me as a free nanny with no expiration date. I miss you too, I said quietly, but I'm not going back. She looked startled. I'm not doing the babysitting anymore, I said. I'm not rearranging my life so you can go on with yours uninterrupted. If you miss me, make time for me. Not just when you need something. There was silence, the kind that makes your chest tight. Then she said it. Damien and I are having problems. I didn't reply. He thinks I rely on you too much, she continued, her voice breaking. He says I need to step up, be a mom, full-time. And maybe he's right, but she paused, hands twisting in her lap. I just needed help. I didn't mean to make you feel used. I stared at her, trying to believe that. Trying to believe she hadn't known exactly what she was doing every time she dumped the twins on me and disappeared. Maybe part of her believed her own excuses. That's what made it all so exhausting. She didn't see the line she'd crossed. You needed help, I said, slowly. But what you did wasn't asking for help. It was dumping your responsibilities on me and calling it sisterhood. Her shoulders slumped. So what now? I shrugged. Now I live my life. She nodded, wiped at her eyes, stood up. Okay, I guess I deserved that. I didn't answer. I just watched her walk away. A week later, the letter from the passport agency arrived. My new booklet, crisp and perfect, sealed in a secure envelope. I held it in my hands like a holy relic. It was real. I was back on track. I called Diana immediately. She screamed into the phone. Yes, France is back, baby. We got the group chat buzzing again. New dates, new excitement, new bookings. It felt like I was stitching the dream back together piece by piece. Meanwhile, Jasmine stopped coming around. Mom said she and Damien had started counseling, that she was, quote, trying to do better. I didn't comment. I was too busy hunting apartments. Dad had offered something unexpected after the passport incident, a gift. Not just money, opportunity. We're putting the down payment we promised Jasmine toward your first apartment, he'd said. But why? I asked. Because you've earned it, he replied. And she hasn't. I had to sit down after that. It was like a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying slid right off. The apartment search took weeks, but I finally found one. 2 bedrooms, bright windows, quiet building, close to my new job. When I signed the lease, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power, freedom. No more surprise babysitting. No more canceled plans. No more crying into textbooks while toddlers painted on the walls. I was building something of my own now, something Jasmine couldn't hijack. The day I boarded that plane felt like waking up from a long, foggy dream. Like I was finally stepping into the life I'd been waiting for. Not one someone else had carved out for me, but something I built with my own hands. Passport? Check. Luggage? Stuffed. Friends? Waiting at the gate with wide grins and travel-sized snacks. And me? Whole. When the wheels left the ground, I felt it in my chest. Like some invisible weight had loosened its grip. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and just breathed. I still can't believe we're doing this, Diana whispered beside me, smiling like a kid on Christmas morning. I smiled back. Me neither. France greeted us like an old friend, warm sun, crisp air, and streets that made every step feel cinematic. Paris was louder and brighter than I'd imagined. There was something about the city like it existed in color, and everything before had been grayscale. We did everything. Eiffel Tower at golden hour, fresh croissants from a bakery hidden in an alley, late-night river walks with lights dancing on the Seine. I didn't even care when my feet ached or my phone died. I was free. The 5 of us, me, Diana, Heather, Maria, and Zoe, fell into a rhythm. We laughed more in those 2 weeks than I had in the last 5 years. Not one mention of Jasmine. Not one guilt trip. Not a single text asking for just a quick favor. It was just me, as I'd never been before. One evening in Lyon, we were sitting outside a cafe, wine glasses half full, watching the sunset paint everything gold. Maria pulled out her phone and started flipping through photos. "We need to print these. Like actual old-school prints," she said. "Put them in an album." "A scrapbook," Heather added. "We'll call it The Year We Chose Ourselves." I laughed, but something in my chest tightened. Because yeah, that's exactly what this was. A turning point, a quiet rebellion, a choice. That night, I found a moment alone in the hotel room, just me and my thoughts, and the faint hum of traffic outside. I pulled out my journal and wrote one line. "This is who I am when I'm not carrying someone else's weight." And I meant it. Back home, things were shifting too. Mom sent a few updates while we were abroad. Short texts, never dramatic, but enough to sketch the picture. Jasmine dropped the twins at Damien's mom's again, said she needed space. She asked about you. I didn't say much. She's quiet lately. Thoughtful, maybe. I don't know. Part of me wanted to ask more, but a bigger part knew I couldn't keep orbiting around her emotional weather. I was finally outside the storm. When we landed back in the States, I felt like a different version of myself had come home. Still me, but clearer, lighter, stronger. The new apartment was waiting. I moved in the following week. It smelled like paint and empty space and promise. Dad helped me carry boxes. Mom stocked my fridge with way too much fruit. Diana brought a welcome mat that said, "No guilt trips allowed." They got it. They all did. And maybe Jasmine did too. Because for the first time in months, she didn't show up uninvited. She didn't try to call me. She didn't ask for anything. Until one Saturday. It had been almost 3 weeks since I moved out. I was settling in, getting used to the stillness, decorating the walls, finally figuring out how to cook rice without burning it. I was halfway through a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. "Jasmine, can I come by?" I stared at the screen. No explanation, no emojis, just a sentence. Simple, strange. I waited a minute before replying. "Me? Why?" She responded almost instantly. "Jasmine, I just want to talk. Please." Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me didn't want to crack open the peace I'd built. But another part, the quiet one, wanted to know what she'd say now that she had nothing to demand. I texted her the address, told her to come by in an hour. I spent the next 59 minutes trying not to second-guess myself. When she knocked, I opened the door slowly. Jasmine looked different. No makeup, hair tied back, dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't holding coffee or shopping bags, just a plain canvas tote with nothing but car keys inside. I stepped aside. She entered slowly, taking in the space like she was afraid to disturb it. "It's nice," she said, eyes landing on the bookshelf I'd built myself. "Quiet." "Yeah," I replied. "It is." We sat. She didn't touch anything, just kept her hands folded in her lap. "I'm not here to make excuses," she began, voice soft. "I've spent the last few weeks thinking. A lot." I waited. "I pushed everything onto you. I told myself it was because I trusted you, because you're so good with the twins. But the truth is I was just tired and selfish, and I took advantage of you because it was easy." She paused, as if the air itself had weight. "I thought I deserved help. That's the worst part. I thought being a mom meant I got a pass. But you were just a kid trying to live your life, and I stole that from you. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some Oscar-worthy performance. It was quiet, honest. Maybe for the first time in years, I let her words sit, let myself feel them. Then I asked, "Why now?" She looked down. "Because Damien's gone, moved out last week. Said he couldn't be with someone who didn't know how to carry her own weight." That hit harder than I expected. "I don't say that to make you feel bad," she added quickly. I'm finally seeing the damage. Not just to you, to him, to my kids, to myself." And then her voice cracked. "I'm tired of being someone people resent." Silence settled between us, but it wasn't bitter. It was reflective, honest. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say it. I'm sorry. For all of it." I stared at her, this sister who had once turned my world upside down, who now sat across from me with nothing but her regret. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. "I forgive you," I said, because I meant it. Her eyes welled up. "But," I continued, "forgiving doesn't mean I'll go back to how things were. I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm your sister. That's it." She nodded. "That's more than I deserve." Before she left, she paused at the door. "Emma and Ezra still ask about you," she said, voice shaking. "I tell them you're busy, but Maybe someday you'll want to see them again. I nodded slowly. Maybe. When it's not tied to obligation. And with that, she left. I stood at the window, watching her walk to her car, not with her usual confidence, but something smaller, quieter. Maybe that was what accountability looked like. Not big speeches, just facing the mess you made. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. A few weeks after Jasmine left my apartment, things settled into a kind of peaceful rhythm. It wasn't exciting or dramatic, just quiet mornings with sunlight spilling across the kitchen table. A new job I actually liked. Grocery shopping without a toddler, grabbing cereal boxes. Nights where I didn't flinch every time my phone buzzed. For the first time in a long time, I felt present in my own life. I was working as a junior copywriter for a boutique marketing firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well. And my coworkers were the kind of people who sent memes during meetings and brought donuts just because. After years of babysitting and writing essays one-handed while holding a bottle in the other, the simple structure of a 9-to-5 felt like a vacation. Every day after work, I'd take the long way home. Just walk a few extra blocks, earbuds in, letting the city buzz around me. I wasn't rushing anywhere anymore. I wasn't on anyone's schedule but my own. I got to build routines that were mine: lazy Sunday pancakes, grocery trips that didn't involve screaming kids, evenings filled with books and tea, and the rare pleasure of silence. It was nothing flashy, but it felt earned. One Saturday, as I was rearranging bookshelves, I found an old photo tucked inside a journal. It was from years ago, me and Jasmine at a pumpkin patch, both of us laughing, no makeup, muddy boots whined in our hair. I stared at it for a long time. Back then, we were just sisters. Before guilt entered the picture, before her needs started to overshadow mine. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift. A soft ache, maybe. The kind you feel when you realize a chapter has ended, even if you didn't see it closing at the time. I placed the photo back in the journal and tucked it on the highest shelf. Not hidden, just distant. About 2 weeks later, Mom invited me to brunch. Just the two of us. I met her at a sunny little cafe with outdoor seating and plants hanging from the awnings. "You look happy," she said, smiling behind her cappuccino. "I am," I said. "Really?" I didn't realize how heavy everything had been until it wasn't anymore. She nodded, her expression soft. "I'm proud of you. You stood your ground. You set a boundary and kept it." It meant more than I expected to hear that from her especially. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Jasmine's adjusting." Slowly. I raised an eyebrow. "How slowly are we talking?" "She's learning. Damien still hasn't moved back in, but she's been staying home more, actually doing school pickups, making lunches. She told me she apologized to you." "She did," I said, "and I believe she meant it. But we're not in the same place anymore." Mom stirred her coffee slowly. She's still finding her footing. She was always the kind of person who needed a support beam. And for a long time, that was you. I nodded. And now she has to learn to stand on her own. Mom looked thoughtful. "Maybe that's the best thing that could have happened to both of you." I didn't say anything, but in my chest, I knew she was right. Later that evening, I got a message from Jasmine. "Jasmine, I baked cookies with the twins today. They got more flour on the floor than in the bowl, but they smiled the whole time. Jasmine, I didn't think I could do it without help, but I did." I stared at the screen for a while before replying. "Me, I'm glad. You'll be okay." She didn't reply after that. She didn't have to. We weren't back to being best friends. But the tension had melted into something quieter, a kind of cautious peace. It was strange, not having my life orbit around hers anymore, but it was also freeing. I started making new plans, bigger ones. Diana and the girls were already plotting our next trip. We called it France 2.0, even though it wasn't France this time. Spain, maybe. Or Greece. Somewhere warm and full of music and ocean air. The details didn't matter. What mattered was the we, the choice, the freedom. At work, I was offered a promotion. Small but meaningful. More responsibility. A chance to lead my own project. I accepted without hesitation. I'd spent so many years second-guessing myself, letting someone else's crisis become my anchor. But now, I moved forward, with both feet planted. That weekend, I threw a little housewarming party. Nothing big, just friends, pizza, cheap wine, and music spilling from my speakers. My apartment buzzed with laughter and stories, and terrible dance moves in the living room. At one point, I stood in the kitchen, watching it all unfold. The people who showed up, not out of obligation, but love. The family I chose. The people who stayed when I said no to everyone else. Heather handed me a glass of wine and nudged my shoulder. "You know," she said, "you're kind of glowing." I laughed. "It's just the lighting." "Nope," she said. "It's peace. Looks good on you." That night, after everyone left, I curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, still smiling. It wasn't the biggest win in the world, but it was mine, and that's what mattered. I'd spent years trying to earn rest, trying to be the good sister, the dependable one, the yes girl. But now, I was done earning. I was simply being. No drama, no guilt. Just me, living a life that was finally mine. And the truth? It felt better than any apology ever could. Time passed gently after that. Not rushed, not heavy. Just slow, steady days that made me feel like I was finally living instead of surviving. My apartment had become more than just a space. It was mine, in every sense. I knew which drawer creaked when I opened it too fast. I had a favorite mug. The plants I once feared I'd kill were actually thriving. Small things maybe, but they added up to something real. One quiet morning, I sat on the balcony with my coffee, listening to the city breathe. A breeze danced across my shoulders, carrying the faint hum of traffic and early dog walkers. I used to think moments like that were only for people who had it all figured out. Turns out, peace doesn't come from having everything perfect. It comes from finally letting go of what was never yours to carry. Jasmine and I didn't talk much after that last visit. We exchanged the occasional message, sometimes a photo of the twins, sometimes a brief check-in. There were no dramatic confrontations, no emotional breakdowns, just space, something we both needed more than we'd ever realized. Then, one Saturday in early spring, she texted again. "Jasmine, the twins miss you. Would you like to see them?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My stomach fluttered, not with fear, but with something quieter. Hope, maybe. Curiosity. I waited a day before responding. Me, yeah, I'd like that. We agreed on neutral ground, a park near her house with a big wooden playground, and those spinning things kids either love or throw up on. I arrived early, found a bench under a tree, and sat with a juice box in my bag. I remembered Emma liked apple, and Ezra liked anything red. When I saw them running toward me, I felt it in my chest, tight and warm at the same time. "Aunt Ava," Ezra shouted, arms flailing like wings. They collided into me like a tiny storm. I laughed, knees buckling as they wrapped around my waist. "We missed you," Emma said, her voice muffled against my sweater. "I missed you too," I whispered, hugging them tighter than I meant to. They looked a little taller, a little louder, still wild, still themselves, but different, more grounded, like they'd grown roots while I was gone. Jasmine stood a few feet away, hands in her pockets, watching quietly. I caught her eye and nodded once. She smiled, but didn't interrupt. For the next hour, I was just Aunt Ava. We played tag. We argued over who could climb the slide faster. Ezra tried to bury a stick in the sandbox and declared it a time capsule. Emma asked if we could build a spaceship out of bark and leaves. It was chaos. Beautiful, innocent chaos. And, for the first time, I wasn't babysitting. I wasn't on call. I was visiting. When it was time to go, I gave them both the juice boxes I'd brought. Their eyes lit up like I'd handed them treasure. "Can we see you again soon?" Emma asked, juice mustache forming above her lip. "We'll see," I said gently. "One day at a time, okay?" They nodded like they understood even if they didn't. And honestly, that was enough. As they ran back to Jasmine, she walked over to me, slower than before, less sure of herself. I noticed the shadows under her eyes were still there, but so was something new. Humility, maybe. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For saying yes," I nodded. "It was good to see them," she hesitated. "I'm trying. I know that doesn't fix everything." "It's not about fixing everything," I said. "It's about being better going forward." She gave me a grateful smile. "They love you, you know. You mattered to them more than you realized." I swallowed the lump in my throat. They mattered to me too. Then she turned, and they left hand in hand, sunlight stretching across the grass as they disappeared into the parking lot. I sat on the bench a little longer, not sad, not angry, just still. The next few months moved like a gentle current. Nothing rushed. I got promoted again at work, team lead this time. I bought a second bookshelf and started reading for pleasure, not just escape. Diana and I booked our next trip, Greece, this time. The group chat was alive again, full of emojis, excitement, and too many suggestions about swimsuits. My life wasn't perfect. Some days I still wrestled with old habits, saying yes too quickly, over-explaining myself, feeling guilty for doing nothing at all. But I was learning to pause, to ask myself, is this mine to carry? Before picking up anyone else's burden. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just sitting alone on a Friday night, feet up, candles lit, knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. One evening, as I was scrolling through old messages, I found the text from Diana the day my passport was ruined. We'll wait. France isn't going anywhere. I smiled. We didn't just wait. We rebuilt. That trip wasn't just about leaving the country. It was about leaving behind a version of myself that only knew how to please others. France gave me more than memories. It gave me the permission to choose myself. Now, every time I look at my new passport tucked neatly in its case, I think about that girl who nearly lost everything because she kept putting herself last. I don't blame her. She did the best she could with what she knew. But I'm not her anymore. I'm the woman who says no without guilt, who travels, who works hard, who loves her friends like family, who shows up for people when she chooses to, not because she's cornered into it. Jasmine still sends the occasional update. Emma lost her first tooth. Ezra got caught trying to microwave a spoon. Sometimes I reply, sometimes I don't. It's not out of spite, it's just balance. And one day, when they're older, maybe I'll tell the twins about everything. About how being a sister isn't just about showing up, it's about knowing when to show up and when to step back. About how family doesn't mean servitude, and about how sometimes loving someone means drawing a line they can't cross again. Until then, I'll keep walking forward. I'll keep planting roots where I was once, always pulling them up. And I'll keep choosing myself, not because I'm selfish, but because I finally understand what that really means. Story 2, for me, managing a hotel was more than simply a job. I lived it. Before he entered, this hotel was my entire universe. My name is Emma. He couldn't be missed. A young man in an obviously wealthy suit. His gaze was fixed on a high-end phone. With a smile that would make you swoon, he checked in. Good night. My name is Ryan. His voice was silky smooth as he spoke. I'll be here for a few nights. Is there anything noteworthy going on here? I smiled back. He charmed me a little. The city is full of surprises, Ryan. Depending on what you want, yes. I gave him his key in response. Our little conversation ignited something. Perhaps it was his real interest in what I had to say, or perhaps it was his curiosity. He left a message as he checked out, but he didn't stay long. I liked our conversation. Would you like to carry on over dinner? It said. I paused. I'm not used to combining business and personal life, yet there was something intriguing about him. We got together in a neighborhood restaurant, a welcoming place where the sound of conversation and clinking glasses gave us the impression that we were alone. Emma, you truly have this place operating nicely, don't you? As we sat down, he smiled and stated that. I chuckled and felt strangely at ease. I suppose you could say that I've practiced. We spoke about everything and nothing throughout the fast-paced dinner. He appeared to be a complete unknown, relating tales of his investments and travels. I opened out more than usual when the topic of conversation shifted to myself. I informed him that since I was 23, it has been just Rachel and I against the world after losing my parents. Emma, that's a lot to bear. You must have extraordinary strength. He spoke with adoration and something I couldn't quite place in his eyes. We all play the hand we're dealt, I said, shrugging it off. My top priority has been Rachel. I've been cautious with the small amount our parents left us, gradually building it. He seemed contemplative as he nodded. It's impressive. A sound head is on your shoulders. As the evening wore on, I became aware that I hadn't laughed so hard in a while, but he deftly shifted the topic when I tried to find out more about him and his family. I don't agree with my parents. Let's assume that I have my own views on life and they have theirs. His face was shadowed as he spoke. I didn't ask for further information. Everybody has scars and tales to tell. At the end of the evening, I became aware that I did not want it to. Ryan gave me a sense of aliveness that I hadn't experienced in years. Because there was something new every day, life with Ryan felt like a whirlwind. They laughed and dreamed about the future throughout every time they spent together. Simple dinners became memorable evenings because of his ability to elevate the commonplace. Ryan, The speed at which everything is happening still amazes me. I stated it one night while we were sitting in our favorite small cafe, the one with the soft lighting and comfortable nooks. He grabbed my hand from across the table. Emma, why wait when something seems right? Never in my life have I been so certain of anything. With a gaze of passion that made my spine tingle, he said. I know, I said, but things are going by so fast. There's a lot to process. He gave my hand a little squeeze. I get it, but believe me, Emma, I intend to stay here for the long run. Together, I want to create a life, a future. Making our wedding day, the most unforgettable day of our life, is where I want to start. It was difficult to resist getting caught up in his excitement as he spoke about our wedding with such conviction and emotion. I was astounded by the beauty and extravagance of the day he recounted. Emma, picture it. No one will forget the ceremony, a celebration of our affection. His voice was excited as he continued. It's going to be perfect. What about the honeymoon? I inquired, feeling both anxious and intrigued. You made reference to the priciest hotel on the planet. He grinned more broadly. Yes, everything is planned, but you must have faith in me. Together, let's make this jump. The money you have saved for the wedding, my money for our future house and honeymoon. We will turn this into a reality. I paused, the pragmatic aspect of my desire to exercise caution, but I couldn't help but nod when I saw his promise-filled, loving eyes. All right, let's do it, Ryan. Let's create a memorable wedding day. The wedding plans took over our life as the weeks passed quickly. Ryan was a man of action, taking care of every little thing to make sure our day would be absolutely amazing. I couldn't help but fall even more in love with him after witnessing his boundless enthusiasm and resolve. Ryan, you're incredible. The manner in which you are managing things. I'm not really sure how to express my gratitude. Feeling overwhelmed by everything, I said. We reviewed the guest list and the elaborate cuisine that Ryan had prepared one evening. I spoke out. He put his arms around me and drew me in. Emma, all I need to thank you for is seeing you happy. This wedding is only the first step. The beauty of our lives together will only increase. However, in the middle of all the enthusiasm, uncertainties occasionally surfaced and raised late-night queries. Was I going too quickly? Was the relationship affecting me too much? Every time such ideas came to mind, I needed Ryan's assurances to help me relax. His assurances and remarks served as an anchor to keep me studying amongst the uncertainties. My days were spent getting ready for the wedding, but in the midst of selecting flowers and sampling cakes, I realized that I needed Rachel, my sister and confidant, at my side ever since our parents died. Her opinion meant the world to me, and it had always been us against the world, particularly right now. In the hopes that she could take a vacation from her work at the cafe, I gave her a call. Would it be possible for you to forego the aprons and coffee scents for some tulle and satin today, Rachel? I jokingly said in a hopeful tone. Light and familiar, Rachel's laughter echoed across the phone. For you, sis. Any day, I'd be willing to exchange coffee stains for bridal trains. I'll be all yours in an hour after I finish up here. The bridal boutique was a white and ivory fantasy, with gowns tumbling down like silk and lace waterfalls. Rachel's presence calmed the tempest of satin and sequins while I tried on dresses at 1 a.m. Me, it seems to have been built just for you. As I left the dressing room wearing a dress that felt perfect, Rachel exclaimed, her eyes brightening. I glanced at my image. The smooth fabric of the dress flows to the floor, caressing all the curves. I'm not sure, but you suppose I feel like a genuine bride, I acknowledged. My face is starting to grin. Rachel's smile mirrored mine, but for a few seconds, I saw a shadow move quickly and uncomfortably over her face. She got up and took a dress off the rack before I could question her. Would you mind if I tried this one? For amusement only, Rachel remarked, displaying a gorgeous gown that glistened as she moved. I laughed with joy and amazement. Are you going to elope? Are you? Or have you been keeping a secret from me about a mystery man? There was a tinge of something I couldn't quite place in Rachel's laugh, which is normally so carefree. I was unable to fully comprehend it. You know me, Emma. Never a bride, always a bridesmaid. But surely a girl may dream? Rachel made a joke, but her gaze swiftly averted, concealing something. Whispers of silk and laughing filled the rest of the day. However, Rachel's attitude appeared to abruptly shift. Moments of distraction took the place of her typically vivacious self. Is everything well, Rachel? "You seem a little strange today," gently I inquired. She swiftly dismissed my worries about her actions, waving her hand as though to allay them. "Really, it's just the commotion in the cafe. It gets, you know." As we left the bridal boutique, Rachel gave me that assurance, but her eyes didn't quite light up with a grin. There appeared to be a tension between us that we were unable to fully manage because of the weight of whatever she was concealing. I wanted to think it was just stress before the wedding, or perhaps an issue with a challenging client. However, I had a gut feeling that it was more. As I laid in bed that night, my anxiety over Rachel's actions overcame the joy of discovering the ideal clothing. I'd always been able to read her like a book, but suddenly it seemed like I was missing some pages, words that are not visible. As the wedding day drew near, the happiness I ought to have had was mingled with an increasing sensation of discomfort. It seemed like there was a chasm between Rachel and me, full of secrets and unsolved problems, even though we had always handled everything together. I had no idea that the answers to those questions would completely upend my universe. I assumed it was just another typical day. That is, until I cleaned the flat, and Ryan left his humming phone on the kitchen counter. I was constantly reminded that something was wrong by the incessant alerts. I was shocked when I unlocked the phone, but that was nothing compared to the fact that it wasn't even locked. I felt like I was struck in the stomach by the texts that Ryan and Rachel exchanged. Every phrase tore at my heart like a betrayal. Their affair was more than that. They intended to ignore me as if I were unimportant, as if the years they spent as sisters with Rachel were worthless. I repeatedly read Rachel's message, the one in which she admitted she was expecting Ryan's child. Tears flooded my eyes, blurring the words, "I can't believe we succeeded. What an idiot she is, allowing oneself to be duped by lies. And now, for the infant, at last we can be together, just how we had intended." My surroundings appeared to be a maelstrom of deceit and treachery. Just as vicious was Ryan's response, in which he professed his love for Rachel and expressed his joy at seeing me disgraced and excluded from my own wedding. "She is really a gullible cash cow. I can't wait to start our true life together and get rid of her. Her money will ensure that this wedding is flawless," he composed. The phone was heavy in my grasp as I sat there. I have a raging emotional storm inside of me: betrayal, anger, incredulity. Above all, however, a chilly resolve began to establish itself. They believed they could utilize me and discard me, as if I were unimportant. However, they were mistaken. I would demonstrate to them the consequences of undervaluing Emma Anderson. Ryan's easygoing demeanor seemed like a kick in the face when he returned. "Hello, sweetie. Have I missed any crucial calls?" He picked up his phone and inquired casually. Anger roiling inside me, I faked a grin. "Not at all. The typical things. A busy day," I answered, maintaining a calm tone of voice in spite of my internal anguish. As usual, he gave me his endearing grin, which I now realized was a facade. "But returning to you is the most essential thing." Leaning in for a kiss, he said. From that point on, I had to make myself not to pull away. I did a great job portraying the naive fiancé. I agreed, grinned, and complied with all of the wedding arrangements. However, I was secretly planning my retaliation against the 4 individuals who had so severely deceived me. My will was put to the test every day, a delicate balancing act between my own rage and the role I had to perform. However, I refused to let them witness my breakdown. I would bide my time till it was appropriate. They would then discover the actual price of their treachery. The picture of Ryan and Rachel's dishonest faces was ingrained in my memory as I lay in bed every night. I vowed in silence. Their perverse strategy would be their undoing, and they would be held accountable for their actions. I had changed from being the betrayed fiancé. It was me who plotted their demise. My retaliation would be meticulous, thorough, and incredibly fulfilling. On the surface, the days before the wedding seemed dreamlike. Everything was flawless: the dress, the flowers, the guest list. But behind the surface, I was harboring a maelstrom of betrayal and rage. Ryan was being himself, all love and smiles, totally oblivious to the catastrophe. On his way, Emma. It's all fitting together so nicely. As we went over the last preparations one evening, he exclaimed, "This wedding is going to be the talk of the town." My grin was trained and polished as I nodded. "Indeed, it will be a memorable day." I answered in a way that was incomprehensible to him. Rachel was more difficult to face. I no longer knew the sister I had once cherished and shielded. Every gesture and statement she made served as a reminder of her treachery. However, I continued to wear my mask, acting like the devoted sister who was unaware of the dagger she had stabbed me in the back. Emma, you're doing a great job managing everything. As we finalized the seating arrangements one day, Rachel remarked, I don't know how you do it. I forced myself to chuckle as I glanced at the sister I believed to be mine. Oh, you know me, Rachel. I've always been good at keeping things organized. The irony was mine, not lost on me. As the wedding day drew near, the strain became nearly intolerable, like carefully and precisely walking a tightrope. Now, Ryan's phone was never far from him. He spoke quickly and in hushed tones. It didn't matter, though. I knew enough already. It was a bright and clear morning on the wedding day. An ideal day for a stunning catastrophe. While I prepared, the bride appeared calm and collected in the mirror reflection. But there was a woman on a mission behind the makeup and veil, no longer a pawn in the game of others. Ryan casually said, Rachel's running late, while adjusting his tie. I looked into the mirror at him, my eyes showing nothing. She'll be here, though. She wouldn't be able to miss it. With a clear double meaning in my voice, I answered. Ignorant of the tension beneath the surface, he nodded. Although she has always been a little erratic, Emma, today is about us, our fresh start. I turned to look at him, my smile a serene work of art. Indeed, Ryan, a new beginning indeed, I said, steeling myself for what was about to happen. As I walked down the aisle, the eyes of friends and family were on me. Unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, I knew this was it. The quiet before the storm was past, and the moment of truth had arrived. The vows were ready. The visitors were watching, and everything was arranged. It was time for the truth to come tumbling down, and for the actual show to begin. Standing close to Ryan in front of the priest, my heart was a combination of optimism and anxiety. The vows, a promise of eternity, were about to be destroyed in the most horrific way. The gusts, unknowing of the storm gathering, viewed us with grins and tearful eyes. But then something unfathomable happened. Rachel, clad in a wedding gown precisely like mine, rushed down the aisle. Her eyes met mine, not with sisterly affection, but with a hard resolve that sent a shudder through me. Move aside, Emma. I'm the one who deserves to be here. Ryan loves me. I'm carrying his child too. With a voice that broke the startled hush, Rachel stated. The visitors stared at one another in shock and bewilderment as the room exploded into murmurs and gasps. Rather of expressing surprise or remorse, Ryan laughed heartily. His polished exterior betrays his genuine self. Well, Rachel said, you've been a good host, Emma. However, this is the conclusion of your role. Why don't you sit among the crowd? Now it's Rachel's turn. Ryan spoke with a tone of derision and disdain. The crowd was shocked by their betrayal's daring, cruelty, and public nature. However, everyone, including myself, was taken aback by my response as the situation's reality set in. I grinned as I glanced at Rachel and then at Ryan. Naturally, why not? After all, I wouldn't want to miss the show. Yes, I did pay for it, I said, trying to hide the fury inside of me with a calm voice. Ryan and Rachel exchanged bewildered looks, obviously not anticipating such a calm reply. The visitors were also perplexed. Their gazes flicker between us as they attempt to comprehend the bizarre spectacle that is playing out in front of them. Emma sat down in full amid the visitors. I held my head high. The murmurs increased in volume. What is she doing? Will she actually allow this to occur? I stayed calm, despite the questions buzzing about the room like a bee swarm. A monument in the middle of the mayhem. Now standing together at the altar, Ryan and Rachel were uneasy. My cool-headedness had confused them. They were having trouble carrying out their strategy to degrade and get rid of me. Emma, what's your game? What's calming you down? With a tone of both interest and worry, Ryan posed the question. I looked him in the eye. My grin never falters. Not a game, Ryan. Simply savoring the results of my efforts. Go ahead, please. I'm excited to watch this unfold, I answered. My response was as incisive as a velvet-clad knife. The mood had shifted, but the ceremony went on. Uncertain whether they were watching a wedding or the beginning of something momentous, the guests watched in a state of both surprise and excitement. The vows that Rachel and Ryan uttered seemed hollow, an affront to the holy vows. They were meant to be sitting there with relatives and friends who were having a hard time comprehending what was going on. I was aware that this was only the start. The big show was still to come, and Rachel and Ryan had unwittingly set themselves up for failure because of their conceit and dishonesty. If someone opposed, the priest asked. Abruptly, the doors sprang open. An older, more seasoned lady than Ryan burst in, her eyes flaming with rage. Put an end to this wedding immediately. Her voice pierced the quiet like a knife as she demanded. Ryan's eyes widened in surprise and his face became white. "What are you doing here, Megan?" He stumbled. The perfect groom's mask is coming off. I had learned that Megan was Ryan's legal wife, and she strode to the altar. "I'm here to save you, and these others from becoming even more foolish. Emma." She turned to face me and said, "You deserve to know the truth." More captivating than any soap drama, the guests whispered to one another about the controversy that was playing out in front of them. Rachel's expression was a mixture of panic and disbelief as she gripped her tummy. Megan went on, her voice crisp and firm. "Ryan is dishonest and deceitful. His investments have failed. He is drowning in debt, and he has been exploiting all of you to help him get out of it. And you poor thing, Rachel. In his game, you are but another pawn." Chaos broke out in the room. Whispers grew louder as the visitors got up from their chairs. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but the commotion drowned out his words. Despite my racing heart, I stood up and spoke steadily. "There's more." Silencing the room, I made my announcement. When I learned about Ryan and Rachel's affair, I engaged a private investigator. In addition to being previously married and heavily indebted, Ryan has been concealing a daughter that he has never provided for. The truth of Rachel's predicament caused her face to crumble. "Is this accurate, Ryan? Inform me that she is lying," she begged, her voice cracked. Now beaten and pallid, Ryan was speechless. Even though the world could see his lies and treachery, the last blow had not yet been delivered. Ryan's parents, two stern and intimidating figures, entered the room while the guests were still processing the disclosures. They come to face the son who had embarrassed their family after I had gotten in touch with them and told them everything. A guy who rarely talked, Ryan's father's voice was filled with disappointment and rage. "You're not my son, Ryan. Your actual character has been revealed by your previous and present activities. Our family and our wealth are separated from you." There was an uncomfortable hush in the room. I gazed at Rachel, Ryan, and the broken hopes they had attempted to construct on false information. The treachery still caused sorrow, but standing there on the day that should have been the happiest of my life, I was aware that my narrative was far from over. I ended up going to court in the days that followed to get justice for the harm Ryan had inflicted. It seemed like a separate universe in the courtroom, when my suffering and humiliation were transformed into legalese and documentation. "Ryan, you used my kindness and destroyed trust, in addition to breaking a commitment. I expect more from you than just an apology. You should pay me back for completely upending my life." With a powerful voice that reverberated across the still courtroom, I said. In the strained hush, the judge's gavel sounded like thunder. The plaintiff wins the case in court. In order to compensate for the suffering and monetary loss, the defendant is now ordered to pay $75 in damages, he said. As I left the courtroom, his words were a salve to my bruised soul. The weight of the previous months was lessened. Although justice had been done, the healing process was only getting started. I wasn't the end of Ryan's problems. His legal wife is Megan. She started her own court struggle, driven by pain and rage, seeking restitution for his adultery and abandonment of their kid. The once slick and self-assured guy was now caught in a web he had created for himself, his dishonesty and falsehoods finally catching up with him. My sister Rachel, whom I had loved and trusted beyond all others, was left all by herself. She was left to deal with the fallout from their actions because Ryan had left the city. She was afraid and pregnant. She was no longer the carefree, joyful girl she used to be. "Emma, I realize that I have no right to beg for your pardon, but I'm at a loss and don't know what to do." One day, with tears in her eyes, Rachel begged. I turned to face her, the sister I used to sacrifice everything for. "You are my blood, my family, Rachel. However, I can't just forget or forgive what you did. You now have to live with the decisions you made, similar to how I live with my... There was more than just a physical distance between us. It was an abyss of grief and betrayal. It's too deep and too vast to ever cross. The wounds from those agonizing months persisted, yet life continued on. I concentrated on starting over and finding contentment in the small things that I had trusted, lost, loved, and had betrayed. But I made it through it all. As I reflected on all that had transpired, I came to the conclusion that the trip I was on within myself was the most significant, a path to recovery. Finding my strength again and relearning how to love and trust. Story 3. You bring shame to this family, James. We don't want you here. Those scathing remarks were laced with disappointment and rage, sliced through the atmosphere. My own father was the source of them, exploded like poison during my brother Paul's wedding reception. The pain of embarrassment was intolerable. Paul's silence made it worse. He remained silent, watching as I was thrown out by our fathers, as if I were nothing. I felt a wave of anger and was about to bolt out. Someone requested assistance when an unforeseen circumstance arose. An employee at the wedding, feeling overwhelmed by an unexpected problem, they contacted me and begged for help. The evening's trajectory was altered by this unforeseen event. I was helpful, and something changed as a result. My father saw me for the first time in years, recognized who I had grown into, not the failure I always seemed to be to him. It surprised me as much as it shocked him. There are 2 brothers in my family, and my name is James. Our father, a strict and demanding lawyer, always gave preference to my brother Paul when I was growing up. Paul, the golden child, embodied all of my father's desires for a self-assured, prosperous, and seemingly perfect son. For my part, I was always in Paul's shadow, never nearly good enough. In our home, there was no time for play or relaxation. Every hour was devoted to classes or studying, and any happiness I might have had was swiftly dashed by my father's displeasure. I worked tirelessly to emulate Paul's accomplishments and get my father's acceptance, but I was never satisfied. My failure on a prominent school's entrance exam was the last straw. My father was determined. There was a deafening hush from him after that. It seemed as if I had vanished from his sight after that. My mother's silent support was insufficient to replace the increasing void left by his complete attention on Paul. Resolved to leave the stuffy atmosphere at home, after high school I had to make a tough choice. I didn't speak to my father before I went. All I left was a message from my mother informing her that I would be on my own. I was able to live and make a livelihood at the hotel where I obtained employment. The hotel became my haven, a haven away from my father's demands and criticisms. I discovered a sense of fulfillment and freedom in the midst of the visitors and staff's bustle that I had never experienced at home. However, the work was not simple. Brian, the motel manager, was stern and demanding. I received scathing criticism for every error I made. I also made a lot of blunders because I was just out of high school. James, one more mistake. Do I need to tell you this many times? Pushing me to achieve better, he would say. However, Brian's criticism wasn't intended to depress me. In contrast to my father's scathing comments, it was beneficial, and he gave me a sense of pride and determination that I had never known before when I deserved his praise. Los Angeles, the hotel's busiest time of day, is one instance that sticks out. The pressure was at its highest, and I had finished all the training I needed to. Everyone was in a hurry. Despite the high level of tension, I was committed to proving myself. This was my opportunity to prove myself, to myself as well as to Brian. In the midst of the hotel's commotion, I came to the realization that I could appreciate myself without my father's approval. More valuable than any recognition from him was the fact that I had created something on my own. After a long and terrible road, I was finally able to see myself clearly, not as a failure, but as a strong and capable person. I was given the opportunity to work alone for the first time that year, and it was more difficult than I had anticipated. We had significantly more visitors than normal at the hotel, which put a strain on our resources. There was a particularly high level of disruption during dinner service, both in the busy dining hall and via room service. I poured myself into the work even though I was still new to the position, since I knew that my lack of experience may make things more difficult for the team, but I was committed to giving it my all. Then, on a day in Los Angeles, when everything appeared to be under control, a coworker became ill. I knew I had to step up because we were already short-staffed. I went above and beyond my usual working hours, doing everything I could to maintain order. Before catastrophe came, it appeared for a little time that we had weathered the worst of it. In the midst of the dinner rush, a pipe in the kitchen broke. On a Los Angeles day, the kitchen flooded, and because there was no plumber accessible, things rapidly got out of hand. The hotel manager, Brian, was trying to preserve his composure, but it was clear that he was stressed. I stepped forward out of desperation. "Could I attempt repairing the plumbing, Brian?" I said. "I think I can do it." He gave me a doubtful look, but there was nothing more we could do. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, approving me. Nobody was aware that I had a rudimentary grasp of plumbing from my experience at a science-focused high school. Armed with this information, I got to work. After 30 minutes, the kitchen was back to normal. The pipe was mended, and the deluge had disappeared. Breathless, I turned to Brian and said, "I've fixed it." His face lit up with eagerness. He hurried over and turned on the faucet. Applause and joy filled the room as the water ran gently from the tap. "Fantastic work, James." Brian responded kindly. "You are my pride and joy." I had never felt such a sense of success as I did when I heard his praise. Growing up at the hotel under Brian's tutelage had changed my life. We had overcome the difficulties of that crazy day in Los Angeles together and emerged on top. That day's sense of accomplishment remained with me and influenced who I am now. After 20 years, I was completely devoted to my work at the hotel and prospering in a job I had started from the beginning. The lengthy stillness between us was then broken one day by a letter from my mother. It contained information on my brother Paul's impending nuptials. Even though I had been estranged from Paul and my father, I was moved by my mother's sincere request that I go. I reluctantly consented to go. A sumptuous hotel served as the wedding location, reflecting Paul and Dad's penchant for extravagance and grandeur. I felt completely out of place as soon as I entered, wearing my trusty old suit. Every element reflected the visitors' elegance and riches, as they were all members of high society. Perhaps as a result of one of Dad's strategic partnerships, Paul's wife, a woman of impeccable elegance, looked to be the ideal fit for his society. I was surrounded by privileged and powerful people in the waiting area. However, I felt alienated. Sitting calmly on the sidelines, I watched in silence as the world I had left behind sprang to life before me. I didn't fit in with the complex dance of riches and influence that many around me were doing. This environment felt quite different from the one I had created for myself, and I briefly wondered if I should have gone at all. However, I came to the realization that I no longer needed to blend in with their society or win their acceptance while I sat there, ignored and unappreciated. I had made a name for myself, a long distance from the judgments and expectations that had formerly burdened me. I was no longer the young man seeking my father's approval. I was James, a self-sufficient individual, and it was sufficient. When I looked into the eyes of two people I knew, I felt uneasy right away. There was no mistaking my father's expression. It was one of utter displeasure. Paul and Dad came over, their shadows hanging over the scene. "You're here, but why?" Dad's voice was powerful, authoritative, and brimming with memories of scorn that were all too familiar. I made an effort to forget. Does wanting to celebrate Paul's wedding seem so wrong? I forced a grin and tried to keep my tone light as I answered, "Oh, and congratulations, Paul." Paul nodded half-heartedly. His expression wavered between the hostility that had always characterized our relationship and his commitment to his family. Dad interrupted again, his voice as cutting as a sword, before he could reply. "For all these years, what have you been up to? Working at some useless job, no doubt." His comments, laced with contempt, cut through the atmosphere. "You shouldn't be here, James." Before I could reply, Dad went on, his voice now brimming with disdain. Desperate to make things better, my mother hurried over. "Hurry up. James is present to commemorate." "Don't be so harsh," she begged. She spoke in a weak but hopeful voice. Her remarks, however, were in vain. With a loud, authoritative voice, Dad shouted, "Enough, Mum," cutting her off. "I want to be absolutely clear, James. You are an embarrassment. Don't ruin Paul's jubilation, please. Leave now." I was boiling with anger, fed by years of rejection and neglect. I wasn't even interested in attending this wedding. And now I stood in front of everyone, embarrassed. "All right, I'm going." As I turned to go, I said, my voice firm with determination, I was on the verge of leaving. I was stopped in my tracks by a voice. A member of the wedding staff rushed over with a look of urgency on their face. "Pardon me," they murmured, a little breathless. "We're having trouble. We don't have enough seats or food because of an unforeseen visitor." I noticed the tension in the room as I turned around. Everyone had a worried expression. My father, the in-laws, Olivia, and the wedding planner. They were all rushing to find an answer. I was hesitant for a moment. There was a part of me that wanted to leave them to their mess. Ultimately, didn't this seem like the ideal chance to abandon those who had abandoned me? But then the old memories came flooding back. In spite of everything, I recalled Paul and my childhood. Rare but genuine moments existed. During study breaks, we would play together when he had time for me, even though we were both burdened by Dad's stringent rules. My resolve is weakened by those recollections, which serve as a reminder that we were brothers once, rather than merely rivals. I would be just as bad as the man my father always accused me of being if I left now. I turned back to the wedding staff and sighed resolutely. "Bring me to Olivia." With a firmer voice, I said. The employees' tense faces softened and became relieved. I reclaimed the area from which I had just been kicked out by following them back into the waiting room. Olivia, my father, and the bride's father stood in the middle of the room, their faces tense, their worries getting worse by the second. Olivia looked up as I got closer, startled but happy to see me. "James, thank heavens. We really need help," she admitted, explaining the situation with the guest list and the seating arrangements. I took a deep breath, assessing the chaos despite everything that had happened. Despite my dad's words and Paul's silence, I knew what I had to do. "All right, let's get to work," I said, stepping forward to take control of the situation for the rest of the evening. I worked alongside Olivia and the other staff, making sure everything went smoothly. As the dinner unfolded, without further issues, I couldn't help but notice the subtle glances from Dad and Paul. They didn't say a word, but their silence now felt different, almost as if for once they were seeing me in a new light. When the night finally came to an end, I stood at the edge of the reception, watching the happy couple share their first dance. I wasn't part of their world, but for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I had proven to myself more than anyone else that I belonged, not because of their approval, but because I had forged my own way. As I quietly slipped away from the celebration, leaving before anyone could notice, I felt a sense of peace. This wasn't my world anymore, and that was okay. I had found my own place, and for me, that was enough. I approached, catching eyes with my father. His hatred was clear, his countenance rigid with rage. "Why has James returned?" he demanded, his tone stern, even cutting. Before the incident could worsen, Olivia, the wedding designer, suddenly stepped in. "General manager, please. We need your support," she implored, her voice filled with intensity. The title definitely caught my father off guard, and I could see the horror in his eyes as I carefully announced my position. "I've been the general manager of this hotel chain for quite some time," I explained, my voice steady. "Since joining during the company's early days, we've grown to other hotels and wedding venues around the country. In fact, this particular hotel is under my control." With a confident sweep of my hand, I dismissed Dad's impending protestations and said, "I think I can handle this. I'm busy right now, Dad. Later, we will discuss." I went to Olivia without waiting for an answer, resolved to turn the situation around. "Olivia, calm down. Sort out the seats and I'll take care of the food." I guided, seeing the release of stress from her expression. "I get it," she answered, clearly relieved. "I'll let you handle the food and I'll see to the rest." Knowing that everyone was still watching me, I left the room as she rushed out to execute the plan. I immediately went to the kitchen where Chef Brandon, a dear friend of mine, was working on the preparations for the day. "Hello, you." When I saw him, I yelled out, "What's brought you here, James?" "Curious," he asked. I laughed and shook my head, explaining that I was actually a visitor today. With only one dinner left, we've encountered a small issue at my brother's wedding. "Do you think you can assist us?" Brandon smiled. "I'll come up with something, of course. Don't stress over it. Many thanks. I owe you one. Next time, perhaps for supper." With relief, I said. He winked in response, looking forward to it. The missing dinner is already being prepared. I wrapped up some loose ends and headed back to the waiting area. Only my parents and the bride's family remained after the majority of the guests had left for the ceremony location. I went up to them and told them the problem was fixed. There will be an additional supper soon. My mom's face lit up with relief, and the bride's parents grinned appreciatively. Even my father appeared to be reserving his often scathing judgment, despite his ongoing struggle. Even though he spoke much more softly this time, his pride was evident. "James, thank you. The celebration can proceed smoothly because of you," he remarked. His appreciation was sincere. I smiled a little and said, "That's all in a day's work as a general manager." As I escorted them to the ceremony hall, I felt a silent sense of triumph. The bride and groom made their grand entry as the lights went down. Their brightness was so captivating that I couldn't help myself. Every aspect of the event came together as if the prior pandemonium had never occurred. I made sure everything was in order, and that everyone was served without any problems when it was eventually time for the supper. Only then, knowing that the day had gone smoothly, did I let out a little breath of relief. I had cordial discussions with both families following the ceremony. The bride's family, in particular, conveyed their sincere appreciation, thanking me again for intervening when everything appeared to be unraveling. As I smiled and expressed my thankfulness to everyone around me, I recalled why I like my work. It involved more than just running a hotel and organizing activities. It was about having the ability to change things when they mattered most. My heart was filled with a pleasant light as they conveyed their appreciation. "Thank you very much, James. It was the most amazing day ever. It's all your fault." They expressed their genuine and deep gratitude. "Don't worry. I'm simply happy I was able to assist. I hope you both have the happiest possible lives." I smiled in response. I was pleased with the way the day had gone. I turned to look at Paul and my parents, and my mom's smile welcomed me. "James, you did a fantastic job. Thank you." Her voice was full of pride as she commended it. Then Paul came forward. The first person to apologize was him. He thanked me for filling in, and his remarks were sincere. As long as I was able to assist, I couldn't help but grin. "Everything is fine." My previous hatred subsided as I comforted him. At last, I looked at my father. He remained mute, making it difficult to assess his feelings. Yet there was a silent recognition in his gaze. He didn't say anything, but I could see he was appreciative in his own way. That revelation that we could still find some common ground, in spite of our differences, gave us a feeling of closure. My phone buzzed at that moment, alerting me to further work that was waiting for me in a different hotel in the next town. I took a quick look at the message. With a feeling of purpose, not dissatisfaction. It appears that I have more work ahead of me. "Hey though, I like it. So, no complaints." I smiled. "Okay, I'm going. Be careful, you two." I couldn't help but feel as I was leaving that this might be my last chance to see Dad or Paul for a long time, if not forever. I didn't turn around, but the thought persisted. I concentrated on my work because I had it to do. I finally got to take a rare day off 5 days after Paul's wedding. I was taking a moment to relax on my couch while sipping a hot cup of coffee. Shortly after, the doorbell's chime broke the silence. Wondering who it may be, I was shocked to see Paul standing there as I approached the door. "Paul, why have you come here?" Startled by his sudden visit, I inquired. "I apologize. Mom gave me your address. I desired to speak with you." Paul clarified his cautious tone. I invited him inside. "I'm not overly concerned about my house's condition. It was only Paul, after all." He sipped his coffee slowly and said, "Thank you," as I poured him a cup. "It has a pleasant scent." He made an effort to grin, but when we sat down to speak, I could see he had more on his mind. Paul's attitude changed. I could sense he had something vital to say as his eyes grew more serious. He paused for a moment, then spoke again. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard him say. "I sincerely apologize for everything." Initially, I was surprised. Paul never apologized for anything, so I was astonished to hear him say this. "Hey, Paul, it's okay." I tried to calm him down by reassuring him, but it was obvious he wanted to talk more. Paul kept revealing things to me in ways I never anticipated. "I'm actually envious of you, James, even though you may believe I'm the older brother who has it all together." His remarks took me entirely by surprise and hit me like a lightning strike. His confession hung in the air, and the room fell into a thick quiet. I was stunned for a second. His admission dispelled all of my assumptions about him. He always seemed to me to be the ideal youngster, possessing all that I lacked. I had never seen this side of him before, yet here he was, sitting across from me. Paul's personal troubles were evident under the surface. I was taken aback by his vulnerability and initially unsure of how to react. I just knew that this was a pivotal event in our relationship, one that would change my perception of him and the way we might proceed as brothers. All of our past experiences, our competition, our separation, and the unsaid tension seemed to vanish at that instant. We were only two brothers who had never before understood one another. Paul, the first, had no idea you felt that way. As I attempted to take in what he had just told me, I confessed, feeling a little bad. That's the problem. James, it's not your fault. Paul comforted me, displaying the amount of emotion he was suppressing with a feeble grin. I experienced an understanding between us at that very instant, closing the long-standing divide. I apologize for not realizing you were also having difficulties, Paul. I felt bad about not spotting it sooner, so I confessed. Despite its slightness, his smile spoke more than words could. His voice was hushed in the room as he repeated, "It's really not your fault." At last, we started discussing topics we had never discussed before, which strengthened our relationship. I respect you for overcoming obstacles I can't even fathom. I want to tell you my tale, but I told him the truth. I stopped to collect my thoughts because I could feel the weight of what I had spoken. I remarked in the beginning that it wasn't easy to break away from our parents and become independent, and Paul listened intently while remaining silent. It was quite difficult. I became aware as I was speaking that we had both been through difficult times. Yes, we have experienced our fair share of hardships. With sincerity, Paul concurred. I wasn't sure how to help him or what counsel to provide, but he appeared to have more to say, so I just spoke what I felt. Sincerely, Paul, I believe you should focus on your goals and not worry about your father. I stated in the hopes that it might give him some insight. I could see a wave of relief pass over Paul as he processed what I had spoken. James, you're right. My head is more clearer now thanks to you. He expressed his thanks by saying, "Thank you." No, I meant it when I said, "Thank you for coming over." He promised to return for coffee shortly after I escorted him to the door. Paul wrote me a letter a month later. In it, he informed me that, against his father's disapproval, he had chosen to give up his legal profession in order to pursue his genuine love, glass artistry. Paul found solace in his wife's encouragement and fresh inspiration in his chosen course. I couldn't help but feel pleased of the relationship we had reestablished as I considered Paul's trip and the changes in our family. My phone alarm, which announced the beginning of another day at the job I had selected and accepted, jolted me out of my reverie.